Well, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Mary Beth Downs, and I'm from Duluth, Minnesota, and I have a studio up there, and I teach privately 6 classes a week and occasionally do some workshops. I've been doing art for 45 years, started in oils. After 10 years, I got into watercolors, and I've been playing with that ever since. What I'm going to do today is work with a Masa piece, and hopefully that will give you some other direction or ideas on what you can do as students. I've known Carlin for over 20 years. I've taken 19 of her workshops. We actually call it art camp because a group of us all go at the same time. She's my mentor and my friend, and she has done so much for me over the years that I'm just so thankful and so blessed to have known her. I think I've come so often that I'm sure that my last name is now Holman and not Downs. But it's been a wonderful, wonderful trip, and I'm just glad to be able to be here to do this today. Today we're going to work with a Masa paper. Now, Masa paper is a rice paper, and it's very, very thin, and it's coated. And we're also going to be working with a Sumi ink. Now, a lot of people do Masa, and they just use the watercolors and don't come into it with the ink. Today, I like using the ink because it establishes a nice strong dark right away. Now, it can get away from you, and we'll talk about that in a little bit later. But this is an example of a Masa piece that I did of 7 Bridges Road in Duluth, Minnesota. And so there is quite a bit of technique and ink on here. We will talk about this in a minute. So this was an overall piece. It's called a crinkle technique because you're actually crinkling the paper. This one has quite a bit of texture in that I created before I started. You don't have to always crinkle the whole piece of paper. So now this piece, there's very little ink on here. And the crinkling that we'll talk about here in a minute when we get started is pretty much just in here. And the rest of the paper I've chosen to leave flat and not have a lot of texture. So you can do a very simple piece like this, or you can do a more detailed piece like the painting I showed you just a few minutes ago. Those of us from the northern country that are absolutely in love with birch trees, this technique really applies to doing birches. Not so much if you're in the southern part of the country like Florida and all that. They're not sure what a birch is. But this is the style that we will work with today. And as we go along, you're going to realize that the less you do, the more it works. So this is an example of a Masa paper with birches. So let's get started. Now, as I said, this is Masa paper, and it's very thin, and one side is coated and the other side isn't. They talk about the correct side being the coated side, and a lot of people like to put an X in the corner to mark which is the right and the right side or the wrong side. But once it gets wet, you can't tell. I personally work on either side, whichever way the ink works for me. But it's up to you. If you want to put an X in the corner so you can tell the correct side, go for it. So as we get started, there's the one side is coated, and what that does is what we need to do is we need to crack the sizing on that piece so that the ink has a place to flow through and get in there. So that's what we're going to start out with. You do need to do the ink. The ink is an Oriental Sumi ink, and it's very, very strong. So you have to be careful with it because if you get it on your clothes, you're going to have it for a lifetime. So some people put it in their palette This is my palette, but it will stain your palette. So a lot of times it's easier just to put it on a plate. And you don't need much. You just need a little bit. So you get your ink out. You sit over here at the side. And now you're going to deal with your Masa paper. So some people like to get it really wet, even putting it in their water bucket and squeezing it out. The wetter the paper, the more the ink is going to run. So this could get you in trouble if you do something like that, if you're not used to it, because you'll end up with a gray piece of paper and not sure where you're going to go with it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to spray this and move the water around. And then I'm going to spray the other side. Now this technique is a really good technique when you're having one of those days where everything seems to be going wrong and you're really stressed out. So you do a Masa piece, because then you can go like this. Your frustrations are already out the window. So now we're getting this crinkled, and this is probably a little wetter than I want, but we'll deal with it. So we've got it nicely crinkled. We're just going to set that over. It's always good to use a towel underneath this. As you can see, this is a well-loved towel that I use for this technique. So we're going to, and what this is doing is it's cracking the sizing of the paper. So now when you lay it out, you don't want to lay it perfectly smooth. We want some of those highs and lows. And I'm going to be working with my Hake brush. Now it's a small Hake. It's not real big. It's been around, it's been with me for a lifetime and I absolutely love it. But you know, this is the smallest Hake you should use. I'm not sure what size is, maybe a 2-inch maybe. So I'm going to be using a Hake brush to apply the ink. Now I don't know if you can see this, but there's some little dark lines where some of the cracking or the sizing has been cracked. And I'm already, you don't need to be thinking of a subject. You don't necessarily have to say, I'm going to do birches, or I'm going to do a landscape, or I'm going to do flowers. You can decide that after you get the ink on and let the painting talk to you. I am going to be doing birches, so I'm going to keep them in a more vertical pattern. And I'm not flattening out. This is just kind of nice and bumpy. So now I'm going to come over. It's my ink. I'm going to keep it over here to the side. I'm going to wet my brush, get the water out. Now this is strong. It's very strong, so you might want to put a little bit of water on your brush and pull some of that strong Sumi out, so you're not getting into the real heavy stuff. So now you just go for it, and you kind of start writing the edges. Now if you have subject matter or reference material, that would be helpful. I kind of like to do seat of pants, just see what happens. So we're just going to hope that this lesson turns out great. But already, if you're a birch tree lover, this is already starting to take on a nice shape. Now I want to get some background marks. Just remember, this continues to work for a while. The ink is going to move, so you have to make sure that you don't get too much on, because you can get into trouble real easy, and believe me, I've done it. So we've got a few things established here. I'm very, very lightly tapping the ink to the paper. So this is a good start on this side. Let's see what's going to happen on the other side. It's a little softer, but there is a really, I kind of like this side personally. I like what's happening here and in through here. It's not as bold, it's not as strong, and I can come back in and add just a little bit more information. Now it's going to be in reverse when you flip it over, so you have to keep that in mind. You just want a few little marks to suggest something. We aren't worried about getting every little detail. So now if you look at either side and personal taste, this is a little softer start. This is a little bolder start. So this is the time where I like to call it dialoguing with your painting. You listen to it to see which side wants to be the side you work on. And I am kind of partial to these little bursts of stars in here. So I'm deciding this is going to be the side I'm going to work on. Now my paper's still wet. You can, now the masa is very thin, so you have to be able to put it on a heavier piece of paper. Now I like to put mine on Arches 140-pound cold press. Any type of little archival paper is good. Do not put it on crappy paper. It's not going to work. If your piece is really nice, it's not going to really be archival over time. So you want to put it on a backing on something. And so you can go ahead, and I will be showing you how we mount this onto paper in a minute. You can go ahead and put this on just like this with the black and the white. However, I like to add a little bit of color and start establishing a little bit of a background. I'll show you, this is in a few minutes, the difference after I mount it and what we can create texture-wise doing it this way. And if you choose not to, you don't have to. You can just go ahead and just keep the black and the white on there. But if you want a little bit of color, which gives you a little bit more texture at the next stage of this painting, now is the time to do it. I still go ahead and put it in with my Hake brush. I have to get all the ink out of the brush because obviously that's not going to work too good. So we just go ahead and clean it. And don't be afraid of it. It's just a piece of paper. If this doesn't work out, grab another piece of masa and give it a try. So now what I like to do is I like to use my Cobalt Blue for my background. For one reason, it's a transparent non-staining color, and if I need to do a little lifting, it's going to come up a little easier. You do have to be careful when you lift because the paper's delicate. You can pull up and go right through the masa, so you've got to be a little careful with that. But the blue is a little bit too blue for me to get started. I'm thinking more of kind of a gray, wintry day. That's kind of where we're headed right now. So I will take the Cobalt Blue and I'm going to put just a little tiny bit of my Quinacridone burnt orange in there, because what that does is the blue, the complement of blue is orange, and that's going to give me a little bit of a gray piece. I don't want it too much, just enough so it's not that just hard blue. So that's what I'm going to do right now. And it's always a good idea if you're working with dried paint to go ahead and wake up your colors before you get started. Give them a spray, even if you're not going to use them. Wake up all your colors, because that keeps them in their trays. So now I've got this blue going. I am going to put it on with my Hake brush. My Hake brush just don't want to fit in that little spot. Now just a little tiny bit of the burnt orange. See how that just kind of cuts the blue a little bit? It just grays it. Now if it gets too gray, just add more blue and more water. This is just a bottom layer. And always mix it on your tray before you put it over in here. Otherwise you can have a tendency to get chunks of paint in there, which you might not like. So now my paper is still not flat. It's still kind of crinkly here. So now I'm going to come in with my paint. And here again, I'm just riding the edges. I am not trying to push it down into the paper. And what I'm trying to do is now I'm going to try to pull these trees out with a negative approach. So let's see if we can get some of this going. Then I am going to switch over to my 1-inch brush. There we go, that's what we want. But these little white areas are the parts that are important, so you don't want to push your brush down too much. And hopefully you can see how the trees are just starting to pop out a little bit. Now I'm not covering my whole paper. I'm not going all the way to the top and corner to corner. That's not what I'm looking to do. And this is just bottom layer, so I'm not trying to achieve a finish approach here. I'm just trying to get a little bit of this blue on here. You also want to kind of think about how your placement of trees. You don't want them all on the same level. You want some high lows, ups, downs. You don't have to worry about it too much at this stage, but you want to keep that kind of in the back of your head. And then a little bit in the front. So then we got a really good start. Maybe put a little bit more blue down here. And this will make more sense why I'm doing the blue first after we get this flattened and mounted onto our watercolor paper. So at this point, I am going to totally dry this piece because I have to set the ink and I have to set the watercolor. So when I mount it, things don't spray. So at this point then, I'm going to go ahead and dry this. So now you get rid of the towel because we don't want any moisture coming in. And now we get our watercolor paper. So now we have to mount this on our watercolor paper. Now this is one of the things that's a lot different when people do masa. They use a lot of different glues to adhere the masa paper to the watercolor paper. Some people use Yes paste. I know they've used matte medium. I've even heard of them using Elmer's glue. I'm not a big fan of any of those because when you're putting this very thin piece of paper down, those glues tend to really grab, and if you wanted to reposition your your masa paper onto your watercolor paper, it isn't as forgiving. When I was first taught this technique, and it's been a while, I was using a wheat-based wallpaper paste. I can't find it anymore. I don't know if they even make it anymore. But it really was more of a natural product to go with the rice paper, with the masa paper. So when I couldn't find that, and then I did try the other matte medium and the Yes paste and all that, and I just really didn't like it. So then what I ended up finding is an all-purpose adhesive and wall sizing. This is SureGrip that I have used, and I get the powder because I can just use a little bit at a time, and it works really well. With this, I have found that all you need is like a tablespoon, and it goes a long ways. So with this, I found out if you put the water, a little bit of water in, maybe a quarter of a cup, maybe a third, and then a tablespoon of this wallpaper paste, and you stir it. It works better than trying to put the water into the dry powder because it tends to get kind of lumpy. And I'm not good with making gravy. I get lumpy gravy, so I don't want to have lumpy wallpaper paste when I'm going to apply it. And it does have to sit a few minutes. So I've already mixed it up. It comes in, it just looks like that. It just, very well. It'll last a few days, but not much longer. And then, so if you have to get rid of it or you're sitting on the shelf or whatever, you can do it with knowing that you have the all-purpose wallpaper paste that you can mix up when you need to do that. So that's what I'm going to be using with that. I apply it with my Hake brush again, and you don't have to worry about if the glue is going to wreck your brush because it does clean up really nice with water. So I'm gonna get my blue paint out of my brush. I've got my glue sitting here. I'm all set to go. So now, so far, what have we done? We've wet the paper, we've crinkled the paper, we've added ink, we've added paint, and now we dry the paper. So now, after we dry the paper, we're gonna re-wet it. Doesn't make any sense to you, but this is just the process, because we have to flatten this out. So now, I'm gonna go on the back side, And now I'm going to re-wet the paper. The ink and the paint should be set. And then I'm going to start flattening a little bit on this side too. Now we're going to flatten it out. Now when you're doing this and you start gluing down, if you get some crinkles or you get a fold in the texture of this piece, that's okay, because we're dealing with texture. We like texture. So we get this nice and flat. Now you can start to see that this is the reason that I like adding color before I flatten it, because these little areas here are really important and for adding texture and interest. It's just not a flat blue. There's some white that's kind of coming through there. And so with this is the only way that you can get this, is at this stage. So if you like seeing this, then you put a little bit of blue on your piece before you dry it, flatten it, and glue it. So now we're getting it all nice and flat. And now we're going to apply the paste. So now you can just fold back half the piece, get your Hake brush into the glue that's already been mixed. And when you're mixing it, after you get it mixed and there's no chunks, then you let it set for 10 minutes to set up. And if it thickens up, it's okay, you just add a little bit more water to it. This stuff goes, you can buy a box and it'll last you a lifetime, truly. And you want to get a good coat on. You don't want it too thick that you're going to get blobs or humps in your paste. Okay, so now we're going to carefully fold and start from the center and push down. Now you might feel, if you're on the side that doesn't have the sizing, you might feel like a little bit of papers coming up. Don't worry about it, you'll be fine. And then you get that side down. But now see, I can pick this right up again. And that's why I like this paste. So get that down again. Now we're going to do the other side. And if you get it on something, don't worry about it, because this just cleans up. This will clean up with water if you get it on your clothes or on something you don't want the glue to be on. It's very user-friendly. Then we'll come back and do the other half, starting from the center and working out. So now we have mounted it on our watercolor paper, and now we're ready for the next step. Well, hopefully you weren't planning on finishing this in one day, because this glue has to set pretty much for 24 hours to really get dry. And there's a lot of tension with this glue, so I will put it under some boards, not necessarily plexi or anything slippery, something that's not going to keep the moisture in. And you want to put a piece on there that's bigger than your painting, because you don't want a seam or a lump if there's a seam, two boards coming together. And then you're going to put it under your board, and then you're going to put a lot of weight on it. Now this has got a lot of tension when it starts drying, so your board might actually start to warp. This is how much this is going to pull, because this is very wet, very wet. So at this point, you're ready to just let it sit and come back to it after it's dry. So like the cooking shows, I have one that's already mounted and ready to go. Maybe a little bit different than what we started out with this one, but the same idea with the blue and the birch trees and all that. So now I'm going to continue on this piece. Okay, so now we have our pieces dry. It has sat overnight. Everything's nice and dry. I still have those nice little white areas that I got because I applied the paint, a little bit of paint before we flattened it. So now we're going to come into it. Now this is one of those things that, you know, less is more. You could make this more of a fall scene and bring in some fall colors up here. I'm still working with a kind of gray, rainy, wintry type day, so I'm going to keep it quite simple. The colors I'm using, I'll be using still the Cobalt Blue with the Quin Burnt Orange, and might be in a few spots adding maybe changing over to a little bit of French Ultramarine Blue. But I like to try to stay with as limited color as possible. It helps hold your painting together a little bit more. If you get too many colors in there, it can get confusing, especially if you're just starting out. Get to know your colors and what they can do for you before you start adding a lot more in. So this is definitely a more of a negative painting at this point, because I'm going to be working in the background. I also will plan on not covering up. If you cover up these white areas, then you've lost them. And there are going to be some areas that I will lose, but hopefully a lot of them that I will keep. So I'll go back over to my paints and then get my Cobalt going. See, the more orange you put in it, the grayer it's going to be. Okay, so now we got that mixed up and we're ready to go. So now when I'm looking at this, and this is why I don't like necessarily using a reference. If you need a reference, you know, to see where the dark parts of birch trees are, that's fine. But I like to see what's happening here and reacting to what's happening here. If this isn't comfortable for you, then you can go ahead and use a reference. Like I did use a reference in the bridge scene of Leicester River bridges. That I definitely had something to go by. But if you just want to go by chance, this is the approach that I usually like to use. So I'm just going to get my brush loaded, and then I'm going to stop. Now, in my mind, when I'm looking at this, I almost can feel like there might be a path coming through here, which would bring some other interest into it. So in order to start establishing that, I'm going to go back to the further part of that and start putting in a little bit of color. Still not wanting to lose all that wonderful white space. Now, when you get to a piece where you're up against what's going to be our birch, you have to do something called bookending. If you put a color over here or a paint mark, you want to put a little bit on this side so it feels like it's going behind the tree and not attached to the tree. So I put some blue here, but now I'm going to come on the other side and start pulling out that tree. Now you want to move it out. You don't want it to look like a line coming through there. Maybe pull it a little further here, bringing it down. Now, if you're doing background foliage or background area, you're going to want to keep your work vertical. If you're going to come down to more of the land or the path, then you're going to stroke it horizontal. It just helps kind of lay things down a little bit better. So let's see if we can get a path going here. Now if you want to lift it a little bit, we're just dealing with cobalt. I can wet it and do a little bit of lifting if you need to. So as you notice, as I'm coming down here further, it's more into the groundwork than the tree work, so I am still keeping my strokes horizontal. And we got somewhat of a path started there. Like to kill the corners a little bit to bring the eye into more of the area of interest, but not too much that they become demanding. We've got kind of established some sort of a path in through here, and right now I'm going to leave that because I want to get back into this area to start pulling these trees out a little bit more. So sometimes I'm writing the edges still, even though the edges are flat, just so I don't get a whole lot of paint on there. But I'm really very careful of being aware of those white areas that I really don't want to lose. And yeah, in the past, yes, I've lost them. But I really try hard to save them. Now I'm going to start establishing this birch a little bit more. And then I got a little one over here. So I'm going to pull that out a little bit, bookending the other side. And we're not painting walls. Let's not get to, we're just kind of pulling things out. Remember, less is more. If you feel like you're killing it, you probably are. So try to step back and take a look at here. Now I got a bookend over here. I got quite a bit of white in here, and I do like that, but it might just be a little bit too much. So I'm just going to try to get rid of some of it. Bookending. Now I got a pretty straight line here, and I'm not liking that, so I'm just going to kind of bring that out a little bit. Got to be careful that you're not getting strong angles. See this nice strong angle I got? Ooh. Let's bring this up so we break it up a little bit more. There's so many little things that happen you don't expect. So you got to always kind of be aware of it and listen to where things are going. Well, this is coming pretty nice. Now I've got a nice little pattern of some darks that are starting to weave through here. I'm going to come back over here. Now this paper will work for you. It works with the imagination. I mean, you already know. I know you know those are pine trees over there. Not the fact that I just told you that there's pine trees over there. Now it's still, because I have this nice pattern that's coming through here, there still might be just a little bit, and this is where I have to be careful of too much white in here, because I want to carry this through. So maybe I'll just kind of weave it slowly through here. And I do like what's happening here, and there's just a nice rhythm. It comes, I'll get that over here. It comes up a little bit, it comes down, it comes up, it's coming down, it's coming up, it's coming in through here, and then coming back down. So this is a good rhythm. Bookending. A little bit more color up here. Now when I was putting paint on, my trunk got a little narrower down here, and birches, they're pretty straight, but usually a little bit bigger at the bottom. So I'm just going to wet this and lift. It also kind of softens those edges a little bit. Same with here. So I don't want these on the same level, so I'll maybe just kind of put some stuff in there, keep those at a different level. And we've got a little baby one back here. Okay, this is looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with what's happening here. So I am gonna, get kind of a strong line here. That's not good. Let's pull it out. We don't want to look like we're outlining. It just seems like it wants to take there really well though. Okay, now at this point, we're going to dry it again because I want to set what I've already established. If you keep putting paint on a surface that you've already put paint on, you're not getting the effect of watercolor of the translucency to see what's happening underneath. All you're doing is creating one solid, hard color that doesn't have the airiness or the lightness that we are looking for. So at this point then, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to dry this. After you've dried it, if you feel like your paper is cold, it's not dry. So it's still in the process of drying, so you want to make sure it's dry before you go into it. So now we got quite a bit of blue, so pretty much a kind of a monochromatic going here. But now we're going to start maybe introducing maybe some grayer tones, so maybe a little bit more of the brown. And now I'm considering pretty much this area. Now, we haven't worked on the birches. We will work on those in a little bit. I'm just working on the background. But what's happening back here, I'm liking what's happening back there, so I'm not going to work up there. I'm going to work more down here. This is, as things come down in the woods where the brambles and the leaves and all this kind of stuff, it gets thicker and it's darker and it's grayer down in through here, just because of nature and things just decaying. So I'm going to be working down here. I like what's happening up in through here. So if you like something, don't cover it up. I love when my students say, I just love this area. And I said, yeah, I do too. And then I'll go away and I'll come back and I'll go, well, what happened to the area? And they go, well, I covered it up. And I'm thinking, well, all right, actually not thinking, I'm actually telling them, if you liked it, don't cover it up. If it makes sense to you and it's a part you like, good idea, don't cover it up. So I'm going to be working down here, maybe a little bit more in the path area. But now we're kind of coming down here, staying away from this and working down here. So now that I'm coming over with my colors, and I might switch over now to French Ultramarine Blue. And I use my Cobalt and my French Ultramarine Blue are Winsor Newton products. My Quinacridone Burnt Orange is a Daniel Smith. So now we're going to come into here with my French Ultramarine Blue. Oh, that's way too strong. But we're going to leave it because it's just a little bit of bit more. Remember, the blue and the orange are complements. If you go more towards the Quin Burnt Orange, you're going to get more of a brown. If you add more of the blue to the burnt orange, you're going to get more of a gray or a black. So we're just looking for more of a gray. And we're also going to mix some up with some cobalt too. Now I'm applying my colors on dry paper. I have done this in every stage except when I initially put the ink and the watercolor, the paper was damp. But when I've gone back in last time and when I'm going back in now, I'm on dry paper. So keep that in mind. So I just put our colors over here and then we'll start looking at our path area. Let's see what we can do here. Now I'll come up a little bit, but I'm not going to go way up, just enough to feel like it's all joined together. Do some bookending over here. it run right off the page. The path is starting to come out a little bit more, which is what we want. Now, if you had stroked this area vertically, it wouldn't feel as much like a path as it would a waterfall. Doing it horizontally kind of sets things down to read a little bit better. So if you need to do a little lifting, you just come in with some clean water and do some lifting. Remember that the paper is delicate, so you can abuse it to a certain point. So the question is, okay, I've used my paper, I've actually put a hole in the masa down to the watercolor paper. So now what? Do I have to throw away and start all over? No. You can take a piece of masa, rip it, don't cut it, rip it to the size of the part you need to patch. A little bit of our glue again, put it down, rub it in, let it set up, and you should be able to cover it without realizing that there was letting people know that you had a hole in it to start with. It's forgiving that way, but it is a delicate paper. And we get some darker areas over here, start pulling that. Now you don't want a whole lot of lights on your edges. You want it toned down because you want the viewer's eye to come in. So we'll tone it just a little bit. Get some of these darks in here. But listening to the paper. Okay, I'm pretty pleased with where this is coming, so now here we're at another stage. Maybe get this a little bit darker here. So now we're at another stage where we're going to go ahead and dry this again. Okay, so we're pretty good there. Now this is probably a good time that we're going to add in a little bit of warmth. Going to clean my palette here. It's always good to have a clean palette when you're mixing fresh paint. So we're just gonna kind of, whoops, that's not gonna work. So. So now let's get a little bit of warmth. I got one little area here that looks too squarish. I'm just going to do some lifting there. So now, still using the same colors, I'm going to lean a little bit more towards my Quin Burnt Orange to get some warmth in there. So I'm mixing that with a little bit of Cobalt. Now, as you can see, Quin Burnt Orange is here, Cobalt here. As I add the more of the blue to the Cobalt, it starts, start getting this brown. But then at one point, there's a transition where it starts going into the grays, and you could get to a black. In mixing a black with your complements is a prettier black than going into your tubes of neutral tint, Payne's gray, ivory black. You'll get a wider variety of grays and prettier grays if you take the time to break it down like into something like this, that you have two colors but of a variety of color changes here. So that's a good thing. So now let's add a little bit of this warmth. And remember to bookend. And carry it to the edge. Again, get some of that color over here too. Doesn't have to be a lot when you're bookending. Just enough so it doesn't feel like it's attached to your object you're bookending. A little bit of color down here. Now this is going to dry a little softer than what it looks like when it's wet. So there's always being able to go back into it. lift a little bit here. So just be careful when you lift, because you could get yourself into trouble. I'm sure I've never done that, but just FYI. Get some colors up in through here just to spread a little bit more of that color, a little bit more of that warmth coming through here. Now we're not too worried about our edges. The edges actually become more abstract. So we're not worried about what's happening or if it's defined or what's going on, as long as it doesn't feel the same. Same as boring, and we don't want to be bored. We're telling the story with the least amount of strokes. That's our plan anyways. Get a little bit of fresh color in here because that's all going to get muted down. Now remember, the idea is we're not going to overwork this. They say, you know, those people, that it's a good idea to stop at about 90% of when you think it's done. And that's really hard because you just think that, oh, just that one more stroke is going to just take care of everything. So try to keep that in mind, and that's what I'm trying to tell myself right now. Let's stop before you screw this thing up. And so I'm feeling pretty good on what's happening here. Maybe a little brightness here because this is when this dries, it's going to kind of mute down. But I've got my path kind of established here, and I'm kind of pleased with that. We're just making marks to suggest something. We're letting the viewer decide what should be there and what shouldn't be there. This is a pretty cutoff line where it's just chopped, so let's see if we can soften an area a little bit more so it just kind of disappears. And the same with up here. Okay, so we've got our foreground and part of our background kind of established. It's not the same. It's got some interesting things happening here. And so we're glad about that. It's very wet down here. So if we were going to come back into it, here again, you would go ahead and dry it. But right now I'm just kind of pleased with how things are shaping. So now I want to go ahead and look at the birches. So they're pretty stark. They're just black and white. We've got where we negative painted around here to pull out the trunks. Now up here, you know, do they stop? Where do they go? What am I supposed to do with this stuff up here? So when you're painting, here again, opposites are good. Light against dark, dark against light. So we have light against dark, light against dark, light against dark. Well, now we have light and nothing up here. So even though this is the same tree, I am going to paint the tree and not the background, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some colors. I'm going to clean my palette again. Okay, so now we're going to work on the birches. And so there's a couple of things that we can do. And like I said, here I painted the background to pull out the birches, even though I'll add a little bit of warmth to them in a minute. Up here, we aren't going to paint negative, we're going to paint positive. So I'm going to go ahead. I've switched over to a round brush now. I use whatever brush is comfortable for you. There's no right or wrong, or if I don't have a flat brush, this isn't going to work. Whatever is comfortable for you is the best way of going about things. So I'm working now with my Cobalt Blue again and my Burnt Quin Orange. And I am kind of mixing them separate here, just so they're ready to go. My paper's dry. So then I'm going to just come up with water now. And now I'm going to go ahead and drop some water in there. And then when I have that warmth going, just going to bring it down a little bit into the white area. A little bit of blue in there. I'm mixing the color, letting the colors mix themselves. And we'll do the same thing over here. Just going to wet it. Bringing it down. Now this is on the lower parts on dry paper. The upper part is, we wet it to create the rest of the trunk. We just need to break up that white. And then we're going to come over here. And then we're going to wet this one. It might not go all the way to the top with this one. And people love birch trees. So I'm going to let that set up a little bit, bring a little bit of warmth down in here. And here again, you don't want to lose all your white. You want some of that white to show through. If you lost too much, just put some water, pat it up. So this pretty much paints itself if you pay attention to it. Okay, so now we've got a little bit of warmth in there. We've got a little bit of trunks going. Let's get some branches in. So this time when we go to put branches in, you can mix a black if you want with your colors, or you can go ahead and let some of the very diluted ink come through. Remember, it's really strong, so you want to kind of wet it down. So it's just a little bit. And then I like to look for these things that seem like they could possibly be a branch. So we got a tree coming in there, a branch. That up. A little broken one here. Work it in so it feels like it's part of the tree and that's just not floating around by itself. Then we got something over here. We got another one. And when you're working with the ink, it's not going to be as forgiving as paint. Kind of go around them, not on top of them. Now when you come to something like this where this tree is further back, one of the ways of making the push-pull of your forward-backwards is bring a branch over the tree in the back. So then we're just going to come here and because then that's establishing our push-pull. We got a little bit strong in there. But you let the painting and the marks that we've made with the ink tell the story. Now you don't need 542 branches to tell the story. So you have to decide what's enough or what's too much. But you want to make it interesting. You want to kind of keep up with what's happening here. So we've got that going. Maybe strengthen this a little bit stronger. It's looking a little bit light to me up here. So we might come back in with a little bit more color. We have these established, but looking at it, they could probably be a little bit stronger, and they're starting to dry pretty well, so I'm not going to hit them with a hairdryer. But we're gonna use a credit card here to do some scraping. So I'm just going to come over back to my paints. And then I'm going to mix some colors here. Get a few things a little bit stronger, some browns, some blues, some raw blues. So now when you come in with your credit card, you just want to use the edge, just right here. And you're just going to come in, get a bunch of paint on here, and then you're going to come in Oh boy, that got dark. Well, that's okay, we'll pat it up. Give that another try. A little bit of blue, a little bit of orange. It's not what you want, lift it off. Mix some blue again. But now the trees are popping out a little bit more. You want some of that nice rawness, that coming through. If you get too much, just lift it off. It's got a little bit too hard down here, so we'll just get rid of that. And then it's a playtime. It's just adding, subtracting. If you like it, leave it. If you don't, then it's time to change it. I'm liking what's happening there. I attach something in here. So I got some nice warmth, some nice neutrals. Now we want to bring some of that stronger color down through here a little bit now. And when you're going back into an area, never get totally rid of the stuff you've already put down, because it helps tell your story where you've come from. I'm keeping that 90% thought in my head. I'm probably already headed into 95%. Bring this up here. Let it run off. bit more blue in here. Once in a while, you just have to kind of pull back and look what you're doing to make sure that what you're trying to achieve, you're actually doing it. Get a little bit more warmth up here. Starting to pop out a little bit more. Okay. Now you might want to, not necessarily have to, but let's give it a try, is work with doing some spattering down here. Now remember, using a toothbrush is really good for spattering. Just remember to use your husband's, your partner's, your significant other's brush and not yours. It's always a good idea. So then we'll go ahead and get some color mixed up. You mix it a little thicker if you're spattering. And you might want to protect some areas that you don't want spattered. So we'll just throw some Kleenex on there. And then let's just give it some spattering. A little bit in the path just to knock back some of that strong white. Now another thing you might like to do is maybe get a shadow technique coming through here. So light source coming this way. So we get this. This one's pretty far back, so you're probably not going to see a whole lot there. And there'll probably be some other trees we don't see in there, so maybe just put a couple others coming across the path, lighten it up a little bit so it feels more shadowy. Break that up. So then that works for establishing a little break into this white area also. Another thing that you might want to do is see if you could pull out some other trees in some of the area that you've got. So see if we can. Pull out some suggestions of some trees. And they're very, very faint. This is something that entertains the viewer when they get up close. So there's two stages that hopefully your painting achieves. The looking at it from a distance that catches the viewer's eye, and then when you bring them in, that there's something to entertain them up close. And so some of these little tiny things you're not seeing here, but when you get up close, there's those hints that will entertain the viewer when they get up close. So it's not wasted time or energy to put these little tiny things in, just remembering to keep it fresh and keep it to the point of still retaining the freshness without killing it. Okay, so now at this point, if we throw a mat on it, you can kind of get an idea of how it feels. And this would be the point where I would stop. I'd really, if I came back to it the next day, there might be some little subtle changes I might make, but right now you're tired, your mind and your brain are not picking up some of the things that you might do with a fresh eye. So at this point, I will stop. It might be totally done, but tomorrow I'll take a look at it and decide if it just needs a little tweaking. But I'm pretty happy with how it ended up in that here. So I hope you give this a try. And if nothing else, cut them into quarter sections, experiment, see how the ink and the water relate. If you choose different colors, it doesn't have to be birches. It can be a landscape, it can be flowers, it can be whatever you want. But it is fun to try something different, and if you've never used the Sumi ink, I really suggest you give it a try because it establishes your blacks right away. So hopefully you'll give it a go and see what you can come up with. Thank you.